It is my pleasure to introduce you to the next speaker, who is the head of research at Topspin Security based out of Israel. And Omer Zohar, he will be presenting on a topic that I'm sure a lot of you are very curious on, is on the topic of deception. So without much ado, please give a very warm welcome, Omer Zohar.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so here's the scenario. You spent months preparing to infiltrate the evil corp. You tried everything, exploits, whatever, and finally, after months of preparation, you finally got a foothold on the network. Now, you got to some workstation somewhere. You don't know. You succeeded in infiltrating. And now you try to move your way in order to, your goal is to basically exfiltrate some data, important data out of the organization. So you're looking for the workstation that you found, and you come across quite a bit of interesting information. So you see some emails that the users has discovered. You see some credentials. You see some session data. And what I want from you in the show of hands to tell me what kind of data would you think would help you to move along in your data laterally across the network. Who thinks number one is the one that's going to help the most? Okay, show of hands. No one? All right. Number two? All right, a little bit more. And who thinks number three is the most? Okay, so we have a majority for number three. And these are the types of questions that I've been dealing with in the past few months. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. Basically, what I was thinking about the past few months is what attackers are interested in when they are inside your network, where they inside and where they see your data, and what they care about in order to execute whatever they're here for. So my name is Omer Zohar. I'm the head of research for Topspin Security. And we're going to talk about some research that we have been participating in the past couple of months about how deception can be applied in the network, inside the network, and how efficient it is and how to do it in an effective way. So we're going to talk about today a little bit about how is deception implemented at post-infection scenarios. We're going to I'm going to explain a little bit about the test that we made in order to test the efficiency of a deception solution. We're going to show you a few examples of some traps and decoys and different deception mechanisms that we implemented for our test, and we're going to discuss the result. So why are we even talking about post-breach detection? So everybody here today probably agrees that the perimeters are patchy, then they can be easily bypassed. Add to that chaotic internal networks with little or sometimes even no security, that leads to a further ground for attackers to roam around in your network and do basically whatever they want. Attackers have most of the advantage in a cyber attack. They have the initiative, they have the veil of anonymity, they have the privilege to try and try again until they succeed, while defenders has exactly the opposite position. They don't know who is attacking them usually, and they don't even know if it's an attack or a false positive, and they usually end up trying to defend everything from everything all the time. But defenders do have one big advantage, and this is the control of information that they have and the asset they have on their network. So in order to, if a good defender would prepare in advance the image that an attacker would see once he's inside your network, then it is possible to change the image that the attacker would see once they're inside the network and to channel attackers towards a detection mechanism instead of the real asset in the organization. And I'll show you how it's done. So every network has its assets, workstation servers, IoT devices, switches, routers, and everything that connects between them. So the deception mechanism that we call the decoy is exactly the device that will mimic the operation of each and every type of the asset. So from the standpoint of the networking services, operating system, application, and sometimes even data, it all depends on the different interactivity level of the decoy. Okay, so decoys have, because they're not part of the organization, they're not part of the real operation. No one's supposed to know about them, and therefore, no legitimate users are ever supposed to touch the decoys. So every time someone is touching the decoy, then you should, the alert is very, very suspicious. Another advantage of the decoy is because it doesn't hold any important information for the organization, you can use the decoys in order to employ the attacker, delay it, and study it a little bit. And while it's being detected, you also know what does he want, what is his needs, what is his goals. So this is the decoys. The only issue with decoys is that, as I said before, they're not part of the organization. No legitimate user is supposed to ever touch them. And then the question is how sophisticated attackers who would not do some scanning on the network, how do they ever find about the decoys? And here we introduce another deception mechanism that is called the trap. Trap are actually a piece of breadcrumbs, links if you may, of pieces of information that we place on the endpoints in order to let attackers know about either our decoys or other detection mechanism, and we're going to talk about it moving on. So if an attacker would find one of my traps, he would gain information about the different services that are deployed, and will eventually reach the decoys. Okay, so up till now this was the theory. Okay, in real life, deploying decoys and traps can be quite a task because there are so many types. I guess some of you are already thinking about what kind of traps and decoys can be deployed on the network and how you're going to do that. And the deployment are very, very difficult because there are endless possibilities. So, for example, what kind of traps would I deploy? What kind of decoys? How many should I put in each machine? How many should I put on my network? All these are very important questions, and we pondered about them a lot, and we had some hunches about them, but we really didn't have a lot of real data about this stuff. So we thought we would check, and it apparently that no one that we know of ever checked them. So we decided we're going to do this research, and this is what I'm going to talk about today. We define 3 different research questions. First is, are decoys and traps effective in real-life scenarios? Can they actually help me detect attacks in a post-breach scenario? And what types of attacks should I be expecting to be able to detect? The second is, do attackers really take my baits? What kind of baits are better than others? What kind of baits will help me against in different scenarios? And the third is there an ideal deployment, or what rule of thumbs can I be expected to use that I can use in order to increase the effectivity of my deception deployment? So we pondered about how to answer those questions, which are all can be answered in a lot of ways, and we realized we have to check a lot of types of deception mechanism in real life scenarios against real attackers. But we also have to do it in a controlled environment where we can actually test the results of of the interaction with the deception technology. So we ended up we decided the best way is to do a CTF, a game, to gamify it, bring attackers in, let them have their prizes, so we have the incentive to do real attacks, and we're gonna deploy our stuff inside and see how they interact with it. So this is exactly what we did. We built a whole corporate environment, workstations, servers, connected in a domain controller with DNS servers, and whatnot in order to make it a real organization. We added lots and lots of data, emails, files, users, applications, corporate web application, all to create a snapshot of a real live organization. On top of it came the deception layer. So we deployed decoys on the network in order to, in all sorts of configuration, in order to mimic the operation of the regular assets on the network, and we placed traps on the real assets to lure the attackers towards decoys and other detection mechanisms. The traps and decoys that we use were from all sorts of types of things that we already had, things that were in POC mode, and some open source projects that we wanted to test. So there was a very big variety of different deception mechanisms. We're going to get to that in a minute. On top of it all, we built the challenge. So our challenge consisted of 5 different types of information we spread around the network. We then infected one machine with a remote access tool, a rat, and gave the contestant access to that machine. From there, the contestant had to do his reconnaissance, get to know where he's at, what his target is, and to exfiltrate this data out of the organization. So basically, you get a really classic data exfiltration scenario. Then we gave the shout out to everyone that wanted to participate. We had people from all over the world participating. So a few numbers about our CTF. We ran it for over a month with over 50 security professionals taking part. Each and every one of them spent 6 to 7 hours doing the CTF exclusively in this network. And some of them took a lot more than that. We also ran quite a few malware samples on the same environment in order to test how automatic malware responds with the detection mechanism as opposed to human attackers. We collected more than 2 million lines of data, and so we had a lot of data to work through. Over here you can see some of the decorations that we placed. So we really wanted to make a live, real environment for attacker to roam in. This is very important for deception. So let's talk a little bit about some of the results. So the first thing that we notice is how much time does people take in order to solve each and every one of the phases. So the first phase of our CTF was very simple. We just gave the contestant to find one file inside of the local file system of the initial infected machine. We thought it's going to be a really simple task as a first task for the CTF. What we found is this task took attackers the longest. And we measured this in number of shell commands they had to type in order to get to each one of the phases. So you see that the first phase took 600 steps, while the second phase, which was a lot more technical, which consisted of moving laterally on the network and doing all sorts of scanning, took a lot less, and it went down from there. We had on this phase people doing all sorts of stuff, from exploit kits to privilege escalations. We had even one guy who downloaded each and every file of the file system in order to check if this is the correct file. Okay, so it's not like we didn't give any hints. We gave, in our instructions, we gave a very, very specific hint for the attackers where exactly to find that first file. So our first conclusion is, if you're going to do a CTF, read the fucking manual. Really. Because when people who actually read this stuff, and people who actually, or we pointed out when we see that they're taking too long, they found this file in no more than 100 steps. So what we have here is a gap between a knowledgeable attacker and disinformed attacker. And we call it the knowledge gap, which is exactly the difference between the perception of the attacker and what is actually going on. So we also found that, this knowledge gap, as we saw in the graph before, it decreases as much as the time the attacker spends on your network. So at first the attackers, they don't know where they are, they don't know where they are, they don't know where is their target. They try to look and find out as much as they can about the network, and this is exactly the time that they are making the most noise. They're making a lot of command, they issue a lot of stuff in order to find out where they are. And these gaps are also the difference between a sophisticated and knowledgeable attacker and some random crimeware or malware infection that doesn't care about the specific attacker. And if we think about it in the aspect of detection, then this knowledge gap is what the deception mechanism is supposed to do in order to widen this gap is actually what the deception mechanism is supposed to do. The wider the gap, the harder for the attacker to know what's really going on, and he's going to make a lot more noise in the network, and it will do a lot more stuff in order to find out what's going on, and this is where we're going to be able to detect it. So before we move on with more results, I'd like to give you a few examples of the different detection mechanism that we placed for this CTF. So traps. We divided traps into four types: network-based traps, file-based, credential-based traps, and application-based traps. And each one of them, we have a long list of different traps. And actually, this is the place when you can really get creative, because everything on the asset can be used as a trap. Everything that you think that an attacker can be looking at, you can use as a trap. So we start with the file-based trap. File-based are really the simplest types of traps. They can be very simple. Like, for example, the configuration file with containing username and passwords. It can also be a document with IP addresses and URLs and usernames and password that from the IT department, supposedly, to how to connect to the VPN. And everything, all these IPs and URLs are basically either bringing the attacker to the decoy or some other detection mechanism. But sometimes it's not enough just to send the attacker somewhere. We want to know exactly when he's opening a file, or if he's exiting a file from the file system. We want to know when the attacker, even if he's not on premise anymore, we want to know where when he opened the file. And this concept, this mechanism is called a canary. A canary is basically some mechanism that will trigger once someone is opening either a document, it can be an email file, it can be a database table, and you can imagine what other types you can do. So what's going on in this example, we have a document, and once someone is opening this document, an HTTP request for going out for some domain that we control with a unique token, so we know exactly which file has been opened. In this example, we used open source project called Canary tokens, which is made available by the folks at Thinkest I think a year ago, and it makes it really easy to implement canaries for everyone. So really recommended. Emails. Emails are working the same as documents, but they have the credibility of being a conversation between two people. So the data inside emails are really can be have really the credibility, and the data for users, for the attackers, can be a lot more valuable. This email that we found has been triggered by 27% of the contacts opened this specific email. So it was quite popular, and actually it was the most popular trap we had on the CTF. And as a wise man once said, you can hear Newman saying, but when you control the mail, you control information. So let's talk about our users. Can users create a false positive when we place the traps? You're probably asking that because they can find your traps, they can find the documents we put in or whatever that we found, and they can either delete it or accidentally click on it, and we have false positive. So what do we do? Certainly, it's really wise not to put it in the user's face. So don't put it in the high on his email. Don't put it on the documents folder. There are quite a few places we found that can be used in order to put traps where users usually doesn't look, like the temp folder, recycle bin, printer spool, and the list goes on and on. So again, creativity. But I want to share with you a nice method that we found was very useful, and this is using the file permission system. So in this case, we hid some directory that contained traps to the system hidden files, and this is not the problem, but really what we did is to log this directory to the domain admin user, and it doesn't have to be the domain admin, it can be any privileged user. The thing is that the legitimate users on the workstation doesn't have access to this trap, so he cannot create false positive. But once someone has taken this trap, we all not only know that we have an attacker on our premise, but we also know that this attacker has the credentials to read these traps. So we also know that this is a highly privileged attacker who also deep in my system, and he has the domain admin credibilities. So one way to prevent false positive. Moving on to network-based traps. One way for a very popular way for attackers to know the network neighbors is using the ARP cache. In our experiments, a third of the attackers use the ARP cache in order to view who is the neighbors on the LAN. So it's a very popular method. And how do we implement deception on it? So what we want to do is to inject the IP addresses and the MAC addresses of our decoys to the ARP cache. So we can use static entries, and this is a very simple way, but it doesn't look very authentic because everybody can see over here, you can see the static methods, the static entries. So what we found is a way of injecting entries into the ARP table. And this is done very simply by sending a SYN packet to one of the open ports on the asset. So any open port can do. And what's going on is when you send the SYN packets, or a SYN reset or a SYN ACK reply should be returned to the sender. Because the sender is not in the ARP cache, he sends an ARP request, and we're going to send an ARP reply from our decoy. And repeating that every 2-3 hours from each decoy, you can make sure that every one of the IP addresses of the decoys are in the ARP cache always. And in our experiment, we found that each attacker that contacted the ARP cache, that viewed the ARP, had a 14% more likelihood in interacting with the decoy than any other attacker. So it's probably it's a nice method. Moving on to applications. Applications can be any data that you can insert into an application that can be used by attackers. The most obvious example are all sorts of connectivity programs like PuTTY or RDP or FTP clients and whatnot. You can use either installed or even uninstalled program. With installed program, you also have the more complicated complicity of hid the data that you insert from the user. So depends. Of course, it looks more authentic if the program is installed. But the hard part about implementing these kind of traps is how to reverse engineer each and every application in order to know exactly what the data structure looks like, what values in the registry or the file system or other databases I need to insert in order to insert my traps. So unfortunately for us, we don't have to, because malware has done these works for us. Trojan, the Pony, Game Over Zeus, and a lot of others have their source code leaked in the past couple of years, and they implemented exactly this method in order to find these session credentials in different applications. So over from all the source code that we already found, we have more than 200 different applications lying around and that we can place traps on. And finally, I would like to talk to you about credential-based traps. So Windows has the Windows Credential Manager, And it's a bad place to save your password, because every attacker that is using a tool like Mimikatz can see your passwords in the clear if they have if they have some admin privileges on their workstations. But by default, every RDP password is being saved there, but you can save any type of data that you want, IP addresses, passwords, whatever you want, and inject them there. And you can see on the Credman type of Mimikatz that you can see all the data in plain text. Another cool method is injecting some domain user passwords. In this example, we injected the domain admin. We have a unique passwords for each asset, so we later gonna be able to know where the password came from. So in this example, we also used another open source project called Decept. Decept has been released by the folks at SecureWorks not a while ago, and it makes it really easy to inject and deploy this stuff to all sorts of workstations. So, however you want the attacker to, once the attacker takes the password, it doesn't matter how we use it, and we had tons of stuff that we saw and tons of different types of passwords usage attempts in our CTF, and you can see some example here. Every time attacker tries to log in to some network asset, he make a request to the DC for authentication. In this request there is the password hash, and by brute forcing this hash, we know the plain text, so it's really easy. We can verify that this type of login attempt was made by from the injected password, which is unique. So and just mind you that in this example we didn't even use the decoys. We just used some network analysis or network sniffing in order to find the trap. So finally, I'd like to leave you with a few guidelines towards how to create a good trap. So first of all, a trap must blend in to the environment. It has to be lucrative and has to be authentic. Otherwise, attackers just not gonna buy it. It has to be non-intrusive, as we saw before. Don't create false positive. Don't agitate the users. So otherwise, you create a lot of noise. And finally, your trap should have a low attack surface. And what I mean by that is don't create new vulnerabilities by placing traps. So if you run code on the machine or stuff like that to create your traps, that may be a possibility for attacker to take advantage of your traps and to actually gain privileges or do some other attacks on your network. So mind of that. Okay, back to our CTF. So we had more than 177 different traps placed all over our networks. 11 different decoys with different decoy services, and we had only one winner emerged from our CTF, which was able to solve all the riddles. So this is a snapshot of our message text that he sent me at 2:30 in the morning. Very happy about being able to solve our CTF. But by the way, that doesn't mean that he also did not fall in one of our traps. So he solved the CTF, but still he stumbled about quite a few deception mechanisms. So, some results. We made a breakdown of the different types of traps and exactly how many traps were consumed in each type of the CTF. So, as you can see, the most popular one was a FileBased trap. Out of the 340 traps that were consumed, 120 were FileBased traps. But as you can see, only 64 of them were revealed. So even though it was very popular, not all traps were discovered by the attackers. We had one trap who were very popular. It was consumed 21 times, which was the PATI application. But on average, each trap was consumed only 3 times. And this proves the diversity of attackers and what they are looking for and how attackers diverse from one another. So each attacker took interest in very different types of traps. And overall, 62% of our traps has been discovered. We also checked the difference between humans and malware, and automatic malware. And as you can see, there is a clear different patterns between what malware are looking for and what humans attackers are looking for. So malware being automatic, they look for the structured data, application data, browsers data, and the most sophisticated ones actually look at files and try to find tokens in them, but not more than that. Human-based are really more diverse. They like the files most, but they also did in high numbers emails and credentials and more. On average, each human attacker triggered around 10 traps. So this is a lot of information each and every attacker gained from our traps during his contestant. So what we have here, so we have traps being triggered by the assets, and we have and we know that the attackers saw these traps and they consumed it, and we actually had a lot of time. We did a lot of data analysis in order to make sure the attacker, each traps that we found, actually reached the attacker's eyeball. So a lot of data analysis and stuff like that in order to make sure of that. But how attackers really use the information? How did they employ it? How did they act upon it? So it turned out attackers doesn't really give a shit about what we think when they use the traps. So we had attackers using the data that we gave them right away. Some attackers ignore it completely. Some of them mixed the trap data together. Some of them even added information on top of what we actually gave them. So we were a little bit concerned about what types of traps we're supposed to do in order to really channel the attackers. So we want to use. Okay, it's kind of tough. It's kind of so we took a look on one case of an attacker who did access 4 of our decoys in different services. So we want to find out how he found all these types of services. So we went back and see what traps he triggered. So this type of trap he found from an email that we found and that contained the IP address of an RDP service and so he accessed that. Okay, and then he stumbled upon the FileZilla FTP application, which contained 3 different IP addresses. Please stop that. It contained 3 different IP addresses along with the username and passwords. So he tried 2 of them, and even though I had a password written for each, specifically for each service, he actually tried several of them. I don't know why. Several of them on each service. So reader added information there. Then another 2 services he found from an RDP file that was sitting around in the file system, and this email that I've seen before, which was the most popular one. So all in all, we could explain 5 of these services. So how did he find about the rest of them? It was a really puzzle to us, and we looked down and we checked. There is no traps for these services. So how did we know about them? Our guess is that okay, you have an RDP service here, and he figured that some of the decoys has RDP service, so he would try another one. He figured because there is an RDP service, then it's probably a Windows machine, so he's gonna try SMB sharing, and he got to the rest of the SMB services. So overall, the attacker added a lot more information from the basic trap information that we got him. He thought that the decoys were very interesting for him. He spent more than 4 hours interacting with our decoys in a lot of ways, and he spent most of his CTF interacting with our decoys instead of solving the riddles. So what we did here is not only we did our traps widen the information gap for the attacker, we also had him, because the decoys were a little bit convincing for him, he added more information gap by himself. Okay, moving on. Our final result is about the decoy access. So we also did a breakdown of what kind of decoy services are being used in each and every by the attack. And you can see that the number of decoy accesses were in the 10th of thousands. So we had a lot of events in our decoys. On average, each contestant used access 10 different decoy services. But this is only tells you half the picture, because if we look at the histogram of the decoy accesses, we see that indeed most of the attackers actually used these roughly 10 decoy services, but we have quite a few attackers who made a lot more than that. So we decided to figure out, we wanted to know why is it so. So we looked at the type of services that these guys that did this lots of accesses, what kind of services they did access, and we realized that most of these accesses are low interactivity events on the decoys, and that means this is a TCP SYN, pings, and all sorts of initial connection packets, which are basically what it is a network scan. So some of the users are doing network scan of the network in order to find who can they access on the network. So if you have decoys on the network scanning is going to be very, very loud, as you can see for that. So we want to see how attackers interacted deeply, a little bit more with the decoys. So we removed all the low interactivity events, and what we found is that we still had on average, four different services. An attacker, each attacker has been interacting. So this means that even though you remove all the pings and SYNs and stuff like that, attackers really found our decoys really believable, because as you can see, these four different accesses, it means that the user has either logged in to one of the services, or he may download the file, uploaded the file, looked around the directories of some services and stuff like that. So it really been into interacting with our decoy. And if we compare the high interactivity events with the rest of the events, you can see that the pattern is not very different. The pattern between high interactivity events only and all the rest of the events, that in percentage of attackers who access, are not very different. What this means for us is that, first of all, attackers, those attackers who did the scanning found about the decoys, but most of them continued on, and the decoys were interesting enough for them to do high interactivity events. So most of them continued and interacted with the decoys. And if you see that no single bar here is over 50%. The overall detection rate of the decoys were 66%. So 66% of the attackers has interacted with the decoys and been discovered. So in order to reach 66%, no single service is enough in order to cover all types of attacker. So in order to get high coverage rate when you have decoys, you have to have different types of decoys, different types of services, and to spread them around in order to really comply with each an attacker and whatever he wants. But as I told you, 66% is not enough. But as I reminded earlier, decoys are not the only type of detection that we had. So if you consider the canaries and the data analysis, and the example for that we showed you earlier, if you combine all this together, we reached a level of 100% of attackers that did some significant activity in the network has been detected by either one of them. Of course, there is some overlap between them. So finally, I just to share with you a little tidbit about how attackers interact with Decoy. And this is just a small conversation I had with one of the frustrated contestant in a CTF when he actually knew the right file that he wanted to get, but he tried some server. He tried to access some server, and he's telling me, "Dude, this is not working. Why is it's not working?" And I'm sure the file is there. And I say to him, "Why do you think it's? Why are you sure?" And he told me, "I found it in the history in the email." And I asked, "History of what?" "History of Firefox." And then I realized where he got this information. And I said, "Dude, you're playing with a decoy." And this guy just spent 2 hours of his life trying different stuff. So just a first-hand example about how interacting with decoys. So finally, I'd like to wrap it up with 3 takeaways. As we saw, deception increases the attacker's knowledge gap. The bigger it is, the easier it is to have detection, proper detection of attackers using different deception mechanism. Diversity is the key to get full coverage of each and every type of attacker. The attackers are diverse. They each have different interests on your networks, and you are the guys that knows your networks. You know what types of stuff are interesting, and deploy the traps and decoys accordingly. As you see, the decoys are working better when they are tailored to the organization. And finally, remember that the end goal is not deception, it's detection. So it doesn't matter if our traps are being, if the attackers are being channeled towards the decoys or other detection mechanism like data analysis mechanism or log analysis mechanisms or even canaries. The end goal is to get detection, and by getting, as we saw, getting high rate of detection is about combining different types of detection mechanisms. So our friend Newman, he had it half right. It's not about he who controls the mail control information. It's about he who controls information and he knows how to employ it and how to use it. Only then, if you do it correctly, only then you will truly be master of your domain. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you for that presentation. That was very informative. The question that I have is, when trying to do this in a large enterprise, speak up. When trying to do this in a large enterprise, what's the thought process around how realistic and how wide to deploy that deception layer? Because that could get pretty expensive.
So when you do it on a large enterprise, it's really important to understand what are the key assets that are in the organization, where you want to put some high interactive decoys to be filled with a lot of data, which takes a lot of time to prepare and a lot of time to and hard to deploy, and where you want to put some low interactive decoys that will just, be there in order to be a general detection mechanism for those guys who just spraying around. So the low interactivity of decoys is the deployment is really easy, and when you get to high interactivity, it gets deployments very hard. So you have to make a balance between the high interactive and the ease of deployment. Regarding to traps, some of the traps can be easily deployed and can be very generic, but some of them, if you have some specific assets or specific data on some assets, then really you can try to specific tailor specific traps in specific location on your network. So it's basically a balance between the ease of deployment and the ease of the interactivity level and the believability of the deception solution. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.